Management, and I want to welcome everybody to the fifth of a series of webinars that's being sponsored by the Transportation Asset Management Expert Task Group. The TAM, well, I'll talk a little bit more about the TAM ETG later on. The topic of today's webinar is on optimization and cross-asset allocation. There's been a lot of discussion about this topic and a lot of sort of research that has gone into it. So we just wanted to spend this webinar sort of talking about it. For more information on this webinar series, and if you want to download other webinars, you can visit tam.transportation.org, and you can click on the webinars link, and you can go there and you can download all of the webinars from both the TAM ETG webinar series as well as many of the other webinars that FHWA and AASHTO have jointly sponsored. And when I say the archives, you can view a recording of the archives, and we've also posted the PowerPoint slide decks and everything. One other point to note is that on your dashboard for GoToWebinar, there's an area called Handouts, and you can actually download the presentations that we're using today right now, along with the white paper that Gordon's presentation is based upon that was developed with the Asset Management ETG. I also want to plug a LinkedIn group that has been started or initiated by Matt Hobrick of the Iowa DOT. It's under LinkedIn, and if you search for Transportation Asset Management, you will find that, and you can ask to be a member of it. Right now, it's geared more towards the public sector, so just sort of FYI. Finally, if you have any questions for the presenters during today's webinar, use the Q&A functionality, type in your question, and we will address as many as we can at the end. And finally, it's quickly for the phone logistics, we have entered into the webinar into what we call lecture mode, and in lecture mode, you will be muted by default. Only the presenters will be audible. And presenters, if you did mute your phone for some reason on your end, on your physical button, on your physical phone, be sure to unmute yourself when it's your turn to chat. So, a quick welcome, I guess, from the TAM ETG. As I mentioned, the TAM ETG is the group that is sort of sponsoring this one, this webinar series. The purpose of it is to share knowledge. Critical advancements overall that's happening with regard to asset management, and that's the website if you want to go directly to sort of download all of those recorded webinars from all the way back in 2012. You can go there. Can you click the next slide for me? There we go. The agenda for today, we have 4 different speakers, well, 3 different speakers. The first one, we have Steve Gay from FHWA, who's going to make some opening remarks. And then we have Gordon Proctor from Proctor & Associates talking about creating a vocabulary for cross-asset allocation. Jack Smith from North Dakota DOT. It's going to talk about North Dakota's experience called Asset Management, Defending Program Funding. And then Martin Kidner from the Wyoming DOT is going to talk about baby steps on trade-offs in Wyoming. And we're going to end with the Q&A, and Katie Zimmerman from AppTech is going to be hosting the Q&A for us today, and not me. So a little bit about the Asset Management ETG. The Transportation Asset Management was established to serve as a forum to discuss changes in the way highway agencies are managing assets. The structure and membership of the TAM ETG were intentionally designed to ensure sort of tight interaction with key AASHTO and TRB committees. The activities under the occurring as part of the Transportation Asset Management include identifying strategies for advancing asset management practice and influencing change within state DOTs, and then partnering with transportation agencies of all modes by addressing gaps in frameworks, roles, responsibilities, drivers, tools, and workforce skills. Also to provide input to FHWA, AASHTO, and TRB regarding the direction, definition, process tools, and templates associated with implementation of state and local transportation asset management plans. And then finally, developing and implementing a plan for communicating the work of the asset management ETG to the transportation community. The asset management ETG has a number of meetings that occur over the year. Many of these happen via webinar. We do have 2 in-person meetings that occur twice a year that are open to the public. Our next one is going to be November 17th and 18th in St. Paul, Minnesota, being hosted by the Minnesota DOT. If you're interested in attending, again, it's open to the public. Just need to let me know so we can expect you. More information about the ETG specifically can be found at the website there on the FHWA domain. And then, as I mentioned, membership includes is only open to the public for now, sort of public sector organizations, transportation agencies representing federal, state, and local agencies. And on the next slide here, we have who is the current membership of the TAM ETG. You'll see that it includes a lot of state DOT people representing different areas of the state DOTs. So we have asset managers, we have folks from the maintenance area, folks that are experts in the financial area. So we try to get that sort of breadth of representation from the state DOTs. We also have international members, Chris Champion from Australia, and then Mo Lally from Canada. And then finally, we have a number of liaisons. The other thing I want to point out is Chris Avila from the Waco MPO. So we do have MPO representation on here. And we also have a number of liaisons from the broader U.S. DOT sort of umbrella, including the Office of Infrastructure, the Office of Performance Management, and the Office of Planning. I'll point out that the new representation is Dave Harris from the Office of Planning, Egan Smith transferred to the ITS Joint Program Office. And then we also have representation from AMPO and then TRB, including Tom Palmery and Neil Peterson. So I think the overall membership is very broad and sort of represents the diversity that exists within the asset management community. On the next slide, I just want to give an overview of the different webinars that we've held with the asset management ETG. So there were a total of 6 that are sort of hosted by the ETG. We've had 4 of them already. You can see what they were. Today's is on optimization and cross-asset allocation. And then the one in January is going to be on January 20th. That's a change of date. If you've already signed up for it, you should have received an email indicating the change of date. We had it originally scheduled for January 13th. That's the middle of TRB. And we're all going to be pretty busy for that typically. So we have moved that to January 20th, and it's going to be talking about integrating asset management into agency processes. So just a sort of a heads up. And we also have a new continuation of the FHWA AASHTO webinar series is occurring. We're going to be sending out an announcement of that for the webinars that will be occurring through June of 2016. That'll be sent out early next week once we have the flyer finished, and you'll be able to sign up for those and get them on your calendars and all that good stuff. So with that, I want to turn this over to Steve Gay to make some opening remarks from FHWA, the Office of Asset Management, Pavements, and Construction. Steve?
Thank you there, Matt. And welcome everybody to today's webinar, Optimization and Cross-Asset Allocation. Very important topic, something that clearly addressed as state DOTs and others develop asset management plans. The word optimization always gets my attention just for what it means, how to best do the resource allocation, decision making. As you develop an asset management plan, you're looking at performance gaps, risk, managing assets for their whole life, and also short-term performance measures. And when it comes to resource allocation, you have some difficult decisions to make, decisions that state DOTs are making every day. Where to best put the money? What asset? What program? Now on this side here, you see where it says it's how we do business. And I think as you look at the whole resource allocation, optimization, how we do business, where to spend the money, using the phrase, how do we get the most bang for the buck? Certainly a greater emphasis when you look at asset management at the long term. How to best do that resource allocation? I'm looking forward to today's presentation. It addresses, the very framework and foundation of asset management at its best. The whole purpose behind an asset management plan is to help walk through that optimization in a cross-asset allocation. Let me turn it back to Matt. I'm excited about the webinar and the presentation today. Thank you. Matt? Maybe on mute, Matt. Matt or Gordon?
Yeah, Steve, I am here. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are. Why don't you get started there, Gordon? This is Gordon Proctor from Proctor and Associates.
All right, thank you, Steve. And Brian, if you could advance the slides, that's great. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Steve. Yeah, my name's Gordon Proctor, and as you can see here, we're going to be talking about a very big topic, but frankly, the white paper that we're going to be talking about, even though the topic is very big and broad, our white paper is very modest. That the expert task group decided that with all the interest in cross-asset allocation, cross-asset trade-offs, and optimization, that perhaps a good place to start in conducting a dialogue about this was just trying to come up with some definitions that we all talk about these topics, and sometimes we may mean different things than what our audience may mean. So we're trying to take a first step here, and certainly not do anything more here than try to begin a dialogue and see if we can create within our community a common understanding on these titles and definitions. So Brian, if I could get the next slide. Agencies have been making trade-offs for a long time, and that's nothing new. Perhaps what is new these days is that this with the constraint in funding that so many agencies have, and with the pressure to achieve condition targets, perhaps the need to try to make trade-offs is a little greater than what it has been in the past. That we're all making trade-offs between preservation and maintenance and new construction, between modes and between individual classes of assets themselves. So while this is nothing new, it's probably a bit more acute these days because of our pressure to try to achieve condition targets. And can I get the next slide, please? And I think the ETG perceived a lack of clarity in this discussion nationally, and what they wanted to do was to promulgate some common definitions that perhaps could contribute to the dialogue on what we mean. That we often talk about trade-off options, but our language as to what we really mean may be very different. Can I get the next slide, please? Is that possible? Maybe we could jump right ahead to the next one. So I'll keep talking. Our slides will catch up here in a little bit. So our ETG objective for the white paper And I think this is downloadable, perhaps, if you can access both the paper and the slide presentation. That what we were hoping to do is create a dialogue and to start a taxonomy and come up with some common definitions for trade-offs. So if I can get the next slide, please. So there's three terms that we wanted to focus on, and then subdivision of one of these. And the three terms are cross-asset trade-offs, cross-asset allocation, and cross-asset optimization. And as you can see here, I think the ETG felt that these are terms that are often used but seldom defined. So if I can get the next slide. We started off with the most common and perhaps the simplest form of decision-making here, which is simple trade-offs. And that this is something that agencies have done from the beginning. And it's the sort of way we define it here, the ETG defines it. And it's just a process by which we trade resources from one asset class to another. And I want to draw your attention to is the word to maximize perceived utility. And so this trade-off may be done basically in the mind of a senior leader of the department. It may happen in a discussion between some asset management decision makers. It may not necessarily even be written down, but they're making a very rational decision based upon the conditions of their assets. If they have one asset class in good condition, another asset class that's not in as good condition, they may well transfer resources between them or transfer more resources to one functional class or to one district as opposed to another based upon this perceived utility. So while these decisions are quite rational and quite defensible and often are data-driven, they're not necessarily written down, and that oftentimes it may be difficult to document what the benefit is of the decision as opposed to some other investment opportunity or scenario that could have been made. Can we get the next slide? So the cross-asset trade-off, we say, is sort of the baseline, and it's the simplest. The next one would be cross-asset allocation, and we see this as we're defining this in the white paper as a little more sophisticated, and it's a decision-making process in which resources to multiple programs or multiple asset classes are based upon the simultaneous quantification of utility. So this might be let's analyze what's the best investment for all of our pavements, the best projects and investments for all of our bridges, the best investments for all of our maintenance appurtenances, and then let's allocate our funds across those based upon our perceived utility. And again, the utility may be perceived or may actually be written down. And when we say within this category, we're proposing three different types. That the first is benefit cost, which is well understood, but difficult to do. And if we could identify all the benefits of sound pavements and all the benefits of sound bridges and all the benefits of sound signs and sound buses and sound light rail, and put a cost to achieving that sound condition, we could probably make some benefit cost trade-offs between different investment portfolios for asset management, but that's very difficult to do. So while we understand the concept of benefit costs and making trade-offs between programs, that's still pretty difficult. So I could get the next slide. The next two that we talk about is multi-criteria decision analysis. And this is something that everybody's pretty familiar with. Everybody has done something like this, where we have 3 or 4 different options. We decide on various criteria that we think are important. We weigh those criteria, and then based upon our professional judgment or some other factors, we assign scores and weights. And we may have investment option 1, and investment option 2, and investment option 3 and 4. And we can assign scores and weights and come up with the ranking for those different investment scenarios. This can be simple. It can be very transparent. It gives us a good record of decision making. However, this type of trade-off analysis can be subjective, and it is subject to the influence of the weights, and those are going to be done by some form of human judgment. So it's still open to some criticism of being subjective. And it also ignores risk in that it assumes that each option has the equal opportunity of actually achieving the benefits that are identified. That option 1 has just as much likelihood of succeeding as option 2 and option 3 and option 4. And because often our options are not as certain, the next decision that we're going to be talking about incorporates risk. So if I get the next slide. We looked at some ideas from Wall Street, and the idea of using risk and reward in investment analysis goes back a long time. And in our scenario here, we're describing a risk-reward trade-off as a strategy that seeks to apportion resources into assets to both maximize our utility while also not exceeding our risk threshold. That each agency will have a different amount of risk that it's willing to take. And this concept, long-held concept on Wall Street, goes back to the 1950s. And the idea is that certain investors have high risk tolerances and some have very low risk tolerances. And so the investments that we make into our assets, if I could get the next slide, depend both on just not only the return that we might get, but also the reward that the risk that we're willing to take. Now we're going to do a Sesame Street level here discussion of how to value risk, and a very simple concept here, but we can put a value to risk and uncertainty. And say, for instance, you've got a 10% chance of winning or losing $100. Well, what's the cost of your risk? Well, you just multiply your return or your loss times your probability. And so if you have a 10% chance of winning or losing $100, your value of risk is $10. And so let's say you face two different investment opportunities, a 90% chance of earning $1,000 or an 80% chance of earning $1,200, which is best. Well, if all you're seeking to do is maximize your return, then the $1,200, the 80% chance of earning $1,200 is your better option. You could earn up to $960. But is that really your best option? Could I get the next slide? And the answer to that is it depends, and it depends upon what is your risk level. If you were destitute and had to have the $1,000 to buy food and stay alive, you would probably take the option of a 90% chance of earning $1,000 versus an 80% chance of earning $960. And so we're proposing that DOTs may actually want to think in some of these terms and kind of research some of the risk-reward investment strategies from Wall Street. And what you're seeing here is a chart where each black dot and each red dot represents a different investment portfolio. And risk is on the horizontal axis, so the further you go to the right, the more risky that investment portfolio is. And on the vertical axis is the rate of return, so the higher you go, the higher return you get. Well, superficially, you might say the portfolio that gives me the highest return is the best one. Well, that's not the case if you're very risk averse. So say you're a state with a very high number of poor condition bridges. You may not want to take a lot of risk with your bridges, and you may want to invest very conservatively in your bridges and give up some other investment opportunities in order to take care of your bridges. So the answer is, what's the best risk-return option? And it depends. And it depends totally upon the amount of risk that your agency faces and the acuteness of your need for different types of investments. So if I can get the next slide, and we'll talk about the last and perhaps most sophisticated form, and that is cross-asset optimization. And this gets a lot of discussion. And so we tried to come up with the ETG's best definition for this. And as you can see here, we basically say optimization is dependent upon computer routines to run recursive mathematical computations to determine the maximum utility for a given set of investments constrained by defined parameters. So this is basically like you would find in a pavement or bridge management system that would run very complex optimization routines. And it is differentiated from all the other trade-off analyses by the computer optimization routines that are necessary to achieve this. So what the ETG came up with was, if we're talking about optimization, we're probably talking about a pretty sophisticated computation based upon dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of different scenarios to come up with the one that gives us the highest utility based upon how we defined what our utility is and what the benefits are that we're trying to achieve. So we talk a lot sometimes about trade-offs or optimization when perhaps we're really talking about trade-offs. And sometimes we're talking about optimization and we're really just talking about allocation. And the ETG white paper here tries to differentiate optimization by saying it's pretty sophisticated, computerized run to maximize utility based across a lot of different scenarios. I get the last two slides here. And the strengths and weaknesses of the optimization, the strengths are that it's certainly the most sophisticated, it can be the most impressive. It focuses on achieving the maximum overall utility or benefit out of an awful lot of opportunities. And it examines many, many different options. And the weaknesses are that it is complex and a bit of a black box. And it's still going to be reliant upon some subjective values that individuals are going to have to put into the computations as to what the utilities are. So while it's very, very promising, and the ETG believes it deserves a lot of research and a lot of look, there's also, they're trying to be candid about there's some strengths and weaknesses. And depending on where your agency is right now, that you may want to consider either trade-offs or allocations or optimization at this point. So I can get the final slide. So really the point of this paper is just to suggest some definitions to prompt a maturing in the dialogue, that it's very hard to discuss a topic if we don't even have it defined. So the white paper is, as I said at the beginning, has some rather modest objectives, which is to propose a taxonomy of trade-off and allocation definitions that hopefully will stimulate some thought. And as the TRB committees and AASHTO committees and others go forward, I hope they comment on the paper. I think the ETG would like to get feedback on it. And we hope that this begins a discussion that will lead us eventually to some definitions that most in the industry agree on, so that as we talk about these fields, we can all do so from a point of common understanding. Okay? Thank you very much, and later at the appropriate time, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks very much, Gordon. Thanks for introducing some of the terminology to help us better understand sort of the complexity of this topic. Let's go ahead and pull up our second presentation. Our second speaker today is Jack Smith, and Jack is the Assistant Planning and Asset Management Engineer for the North Dakota Department of Transportation. And so he's going to be talking to us about their approach to addressing some of these cross-asset issues. Jack?
Well, thank you, Katie. Let's see. I got control here. Yeah, all right. I guess, you know, we kind of are approaching this from really kind of a boots on the ground practical application to really fit a business need. So in order to do that, I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about the conditions that kind of brought us to where we were at, and follow in with kind of some of the more specifics on how we're actually doing it, and also the implementation itself, where we're going in the near future. So to start off, we'll just briefly talk about language. Hopefully this doesn't differentiate too much from what Gordon brought up. I guess one of the first things that we're looking at is, you know, the trade-off analysis versus an optimization analysis. You know, the way we look at it is if you're taking a slider and you're moving dollars essentially from one asset class to another, that we're looking at a trade-off, where the optimization, like Gordon had mentioned, is likely very computational driven. The advantage that we're looking at right now for the trade-off analysis is that we feel we can do a lot of the sophisticated calculations in advance, and then after that come back and be able to have more real-time, show the real-time the impacts of investments. There's also two components to asset management that we see kind of in the North Dakota DOT, is the strategic level aspect, where we're looking at a system-wide impact of our investments, and then also the tactical level. So when you get into the actual asset class, to make the determinations or recommendations for programming specific projects and treatments. One of the things that my boss likes to reiterate, and I like to too as much as possible, is that asset management is a way of thinking. You know, it's not a piece of software. You know, a lot of times we utilize software when we have a lot of investments to take care of, a lot of different options to analyze. But if you have simple, a more simple program, you know, pen and paper is, you know, possible. But fundamentally, asset management, goal-driven, goal-oriented, data-driven decision-making process. And then we also see asset management as providing information to the people that make decisions. It doesn't make the decisions for us. It's a recommendation. So then that moves us to why are we doing asset management? And you know, we've shown this this graph a few times. I'm not certain about 2016 funding, but in general, our funding is essentially pretty unpredictable in the near future. We don't really know where things are going. So we got to assume somewhat of the worst, and that we have to be able to deal with the consequences. At the same time, the need, the actual vehicle miles traveled has increased, and it doesn't seem to be letting up. We took a little bit of a dip, you know, around during the Great Recession, but it looks like we're back on track, and it looks, you know, if you extend this graph, it seems that the slope is pretty similar to what it was before, so we have to anticipate that. On the other side of things, we're looking at our state funding. We relatively certain at a certain time for the federal piece, but moving forward, whether we'll get one-time expenditures from our legislature and state funds, and also how the federal program looks in the future, it's just not as certain. So we have to be very careful with how we're making our investments. Another example of increased usage of our system, North Dakota's highway system was really kind of modernized and developed back in the 50s to kind of address the needs back then. And as you can see from this slide, we're looking at a significant increase in the amount of agriculture production coming out of the state. It has a lot to do with the science and production of crops advancing. So it's good that we're able to produce more, but it's definitely putting significant extra strain on our system. And then what's the most important road in the world? Well, you know, I think the answer is the road that's in front of your house or the road that's in front of your business. And we're sitting in an era where the funding is uncertain. So what happens when people aren't getting the funding for the most important road to them? We get challenged in that, and we could potentially lose autonomy in programming specific projects. We have to be able to demonstrate to our customers that we have a logical, data-driven process for making our investments. And you know, at the same time, you know, agencies right now are competing for funding. If we get into the specific programming of projects, we're looking at more program areas within agencies competing. This is a graph that we showed our stakeholders about a year ago, showing how our pavement is actually progressing. It's roughness is the metric that we use for pavements, and despite all of our investments, we're showing a decline. When we showed this graph to our stakeholders, we were told that this is essentially unacceptable. They followed this by saying, we want you to put your IT budget into your pavements until this approves. You know, looking at this, it represents 8,000 miles of roadway system-wide. You know, a couple $1 million from an IT budget isn't going to make a dent in this, and that's where we realized that there's a desire to shift money within the agency as well as between agencies, and we need to be able to show the impact of making those adjustments. It would devastate our IT program with not a whole lot of benefit to our roadways. So through that, what we decided to do is we wanted to refine our planning, performance measures, our asset management programming processes, and we wanted to present the proposed budgets by showing the impacts across all of those programs, show why our plan maximizes the service, and ultimately we wanted to be able to show our stakeholders what they're getting for their investment. You know, in other words, we answer how much funding is needed to maintain a level of service, what level of service can be provided at a given funding level, and where's the best place to spend the additional given dollar that we may receive. And through that process, we were finding the tie between our planning, our performance management, asset management, and programming, I guess, functions. And with the idea that we're going to be as transparent as possible and show the service we're providing, we're very confident that what we're doing is logical and that we've got a good process. The expectation now is that we're able to show that to our stakeholders. So essentially, we move from the maintenance side of things, maintenance and operation of a facility or a roadway, into the actual programming of projects. So there's essentially 4 steps that take place. There's the planning, where we set across the expectations. And I'll talk more about the other 3 as we move on, but we'll start out with planning. Through planning, we define our customers' expectations, and we do that in a number of ways with our strategic plan, with our freight plan, determining what's important to our customers. From there, we establish performance. We try to come up with detailed indicators that measure whether or not we're heading towards what we're planning for. You know, and through that, we report our future asset trends based off of service indicators. We call them service indicators in the North Dakota DOT, but what that really is from a nationwide standpoint, that's performance measures. There's a little bit of a negative connotation that we have had in the past with performance measures tying back to individual performance of reviews of staff. And this was many, many years ago, but there's enough folks in the department that remember those days, and we're really trying to focus on the service that we're providing and whether or not we're accomplishing that. From there, we use transportation asset management to come up with an investment strategy that hopefully gets us to improve or to hit the targets we're establishing for performance. In the past, we really looked at investment strategy based off of funding categories. So on the top chart there we talk about what's coming in from the urban program, county, you know, what do we need to spend on PEP, which is like the preliminary engineering side of things. And then from there we would categorize the work type and our investment strategies based off of our highway performance classification system, which is kind of like functional class, but it takes into account, you know, interstate, interregional roadways. And then we have what we call the lower 3-tier roadways that are generally contained within the states, the state corridor, district corridor, and district collector. But as I mentioned before, that doesn't help us with the issue as far as moving money between programs. So we're moving to a strategy based on investment classes. You know, this is the most recent version of that, which we use this last biennium. And as you can see, it has pavement kind of preservation, bridge preservation. Through there, we also take what we call mega bridges off the top of our bridge program, because I think it's around $9 million program. It really isn't going to pay for a very expensive bridge that we need to replace. In addition, we looked at our what we call functional capacity investments, which are essentially more tied to load carrying capacity projects or improving the width of a roadway. In addition, we had safety and seal coats. But really, we need to get a little bit more sophisticated with that, and we're going to be doing that in the near future. Which kind of brings us to the implementation plan of what we're doing to cover all of our program areas. This is the full list of program areas that we intend to cover. The the circles that are in green are the ones that we have already. We have a trade-off hub that allows us to move money between pavement management and that functional capacity investment class that I had mentioned. But we also are going to need to cover each of these other categories, including snow and ice, safety, bike ped, really the whole gamut of what we do in the department. This is a screenshot of our trade-off hub that takes into account pavement preservation and functional capacity. In the center, we have our actual budget that we're anticipating that we're going to be able to work with. And with that budget, center budget, we can move funding to those different charts and show in real time what the impact of that is going to be. You know, I guess really one of the main issues with this is that real-time portion. If you look at the pavement preservation chart on the left, as we move money in and out of that, it will adjust in real time because we have ran several budgets in advance, and it'll interpolate if we hit in between points so that we can kind of show them a general idea. If it's not precise, what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll run it through our model to ensure that what we presented is close to reality. Okay, so as you know, we come up with these investment categories. You know, each one of them needs a service indicator or a performance measure. So in the case of pavements, we have chosen RIDE, and that's what we're going to show folks as to how we're doing. How is the RIDE responding to our investments, and that's over a defined investment period. You know, the source of funding, we're going to have to take that into consideration because there are certain things like safety that have safety dollars tied to it. We're not going to be able to pull those dollars and put them into bridge, so necessarily. So we'll need to be able to kind of flag that if we're making a decision, an investment decision that isn't going to work from funding constraints. There's also a couple of those asset classes that are interdependent in the department for us. Snow and ice control and our summer maintenance are interdependent in that if we have a mild winter, the leftover money from snow and ice control will go towards things like crack sealing and mowing and that sort of summer maintenance activities. So those will have to kind of link together before they link to the hub itself. You know, we also have to clearly define what each investment class covers. So I talked about crack sealing and potentially some patching and things like that we cover under summer maintenance. That is not taken into account in the pavement preservation portion. So we got to have kind of a line drawn so we're not double counting. Some of the other considerations we had to take into account is, you know, we have different deterioration rates and service lives for a lot of these assets. You know, bridges tend to last a lot longer than our pavements do, which also last a lot longer than something like signs. So we're looking at, we have to come up with basically a defined analysis period of 20 years. And hopefully, you know, the thought is that even though bridges last longer, we have many bridges that are in many different states of condition in that, and we're looking at the system average itself. So a lot of that will kind of average out and kind of wash out from the program level. You know, and the other thing is that the service indicator or measure that you choose doesn't have to actually take into account everything that you think about when you manage that asset. So when we report RIDE, you know, that's our most important parameter that we look at for reporting, but it's definitely not the only thing that we consider when we manage our pavements. There's things like rut and distress, and you know, the actual management of that asset is more complex than what we present as far as impacts of our investment. We are currently have a very aggressive implementation timeline. The additional service indicators or asset class groups that I had brought up, we need to have those indicators ready by November 17th of this year. And we'll be preparing and presenting the draft hub results to our executives in April of next year. And we will refine and verify our models, you know, if needed, so that our executives can take a proposal proposed investment strategy to our governor for this summer. The governor at that point will take his proposed budget to the legislature for the next legislative session, which would be January of 2017. I skipped one. All right. Well, there's something I should note about that that time frame. It's extremely aggressive, and it's going to be tough to achieve. This isn't something that you can just drop and just all of a sudden do. We've had a lot of outreach to the various partners that we have in the department, and also with our executives for a number of years, talking about this concept and that this is where we likely need to go. So at this point, most people have heard the message and they've heard it for a long time. At the same time, we're a smaller organization. A lot of our managers and program managers have worked in many different areas of the department. My boss actually works in planning, but he's been a district engineer. He's worked in our maintenance division. A lot of us have worn many hats throughout our career, so we have a good understanding of what our colleagues do. And then the last part is that we're very, very confident in the decisions that we're making are logical and that they're data-based. So we really don't have much to hide. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. Of course, we can't talk about asset management without talking about risk. And when it comes to risk, in a big way, we're kind of waiting to see what the federal rules show. From our philosophy, we keep risk in mind as it relates to the actual classification of the roadway. We have expectations of more resilience and less risk on interstate roadways than our lower tier ones. We also have developed a freight network, level 1, 2, and 3 corridors, we call them, and we have higher expectations on the higher corridors, so we have a little bit less tolerance for risk, and it's more on a programmatic level rather than a project by project level that we think about this. But we are waiting for the final rule to see if there's additional, more specific work that we need to do. From our standpoint, what we've outlined is that we kind of feel like this is the trade-off, and I hope this kind of works with Gordon's definition. And right now, we feel like this is something that we can get results from now. We're open to optimization if we can achieve it. It's kind of, to us, has been kind of like the holy grail of this whole process. The big need that we need to fulfill is we need to be able to get answers back and do real-time responses to these investment decisions. So that's kind of been the biggest obstacle from our standpoint on the optimization side of things. I guess, and then in conclusion, we're looking to establish transparency. We're looking at providing our investment decisions for the program level. This isn't about digging down into our design division's budget or our research division's budget. We're looking more at the overall program and service that we're providing. And we didn't do this to meet a federal asset management requirement. I mean, we're just kind of living in that world right now where there's that accountability that's being demanded from our customers, and it's about fulfilling that responsibility to them. And yeah, I guess that was all I had, and that I'm willing to talk about or answer some questions during the question and answer period.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jack. While we're pulling up the last presentation, I did have one question for you. You mentioned that in the next week or so, you're going to be putting together some service indicators for the various investment classes that you're going to be working with in your hub. Are you trying to set all of those service indicators or metrics on some sort of an equal scale so that you can compare one investment in one asset over another?
There's one thing that's going to be challenging about that is with each of those indicators, we don't have models tied to every one of them. So the ones that we don't have models tied to, we're going to be looking at an expert task group for each of those to help determine what the impact of an investment would be. What they do have in common, or what they have to have in common, is that they're all tied to a dollar value. So you're going to have to see some sort of a benefit in the performance of that indicator tied directly to money, and the dollar itself is what we transfer between the different classes. So you know, it might be interesting if we see some unbalanced results based off of the indicators, but we've also got somebody from our planning asset management division sitting on each one of those committees that are developing those indicators to try to get something that ties directly to funding.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure some of our other audience members have some questions for you, and I will encourage everyone to use the question pod down at the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side, I believe. Go ahead and enter some questions, and after our third speaker speaks, we'll have an opportunity to address some of your questions. With that, I'd like to introduce Martin Kidner, who is the State Planning Engineer for the Wyoming DOT. And Martin is going to talk to us about some of the baby steps they're taking. Martin, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, if you could, Brian, it doesn't seem to move down when I hit that. If you'd go ahead and go to the next slide for me, please. So bottom line with the thing is, as you can see here, this is a cartoon sketch, and I think that that's what Jack was referring to, is that basically I went out to all my program managers who receive funds to try to meet a goal with WYDOT. And, you know, I basically instructed each one of them that they had to come up with their own benefits, and then obviously to implement that project of that their program was responsible for. I expected to see a cost with that. And so, you know, the idea is that I got these nice little stack of projects that are out there, and you could then move your budget limit. For example, I usually started with their historical budget limit and then said, okay, what would you spend the money on if I gave you 20% more, and what would the benefit change be? And then a 40%. So I could kind of see you know, how that curve was reacting when I started dealing with some of these other programs out there throughout the department. Next slide, please. Now, the reality of what I actually ran into there is that, you know, Jack mentioned the risks that you want to take a look at on your systems out there. So the black line is the interstate, the green line is all my NHS roads, non-NHS roads out there, and the red line is the NHS roads. Well, the reality is that you start getting these, trying to optimize the dollars throughout your financial plan and your investment plan at the big points where, you know, the pavement's got X amount of dollars. That what we found was that even when you got that, you had to go back into those other programs and say, okay, with this amount of dollars, you're going to have to show me now how you're going to spend that money within your program. And so, you know, I use this slide quite a bit because originally, you know, I asked a simple question about, well, okay, if I hold your dollars amount the same, what are you going to provide for me? And the answer came back of an average of 51% in good or excellent condition. Well, you know, when you actually got down in the details offline with them and said, okay, how are you going to achieve that? Well, in this era of austerity where we just don't have enough money to do everything that we need to do, they were basically taking the acceptance of a risk with the interstate and allowing it to go from 83% in good or excellent condition down to approximately 52%. But the answer still came out of, oh, this is great because the goal was 51% in good or excellent condition, and that's what we have. So, you know, it's really one of the things that I wanted to stress that we got into is that it's, you know, when you got this constraint of funds, there's a lot of behind the scenes that these programs are trying to balance that also bring up other issues that make it very difficult to do that trade-off at the high level. You still need to do that trade-off for your investment plan in order to tell pavements that they get a certain amount of your budget, but you also need to go back in there and also try to figure out, well, what exactly is going on that's going to achieve that overall goal that you have out there? And so I really was able to finally squeeze out of my bridge guys because they were very reluctant, and I got to stress that this is still just a draft. They're going to try to refine this some more. But we needed to do the same thing with the bridge. For example, what I'm showing here is the budget amount that they got. I moved, as I said, I started out with their baseline, and then I asked them to move up, give me a series of scenarios of what would happen if I moved them up by 20% and then 40%. And so they moved up 20%. As you can see here, one of the nationally MAP 21 directed goals that we had there was to try to get that safety deficiency, the structural deficiency, down below 10% on the interstates and the NHS. So, you know, it's showing that, okay, this is your curve that you're going to start getting, and as you can see, it flatlines out there because so many of our bridges were built in the interstate era, and they're all over 50 years old. That the interesting thing is, you know, how fast are they actually failing, and try to get at that. But I also have these curves built for, you know, the other three major portions that were called out in the NPRM with the deck, the superstructure, and the substructure about, well, what exactly is going on with those? And so, you know, the bridge, even though the bridge turns out to be, you know, with the baseline, the increase by 20% and an increase by 40% of the funding, in order for me to try to do some of these trade-offs, that the reality is I really had to go out there and look at 4 different individual sections out there in order to make a good judgment on what is actually the best mix that we have out there. So, you know, really, when you look at in Wyoming, that the 3 big buckets of money that we spend out there, and it's not just the HSIP money, but, you know, the areas that we spend money on in order to achieve goals, safety was one of the big ones, and we had been struggling with that from about day one with the with our asset management plan about, well, how do we go about this? And right now I'm saying the big game changer has been the Highway Safety Manual and getting that published. And because that really has given me the opportunity to actually get in there and stack up these projects like I showed on that second slide, where you had all this nice, neat little, you know, if you do these projects that you get this benefit, so you get this, you know, the cartoon sketch. But, you know, bottom line with it, that this really gave me the ability to do that. So what this gives, and I just wanted to stress this to the planners out there primarily, because what this actually gave to me is this red line that you see down in the middle. It kind of holds pretty constant. That is, you know, when you use a Highway Safety Manual and you use the items that they have out there for that road, you can come up and then apply a SPF to it. You come up with this expected crashes on it. And as you can see on this road here, is that we have these areas here in the first 7 miles of the road where we're getting significantly higher crashes than we are than as expected. But then you can see that it drops down over the next 8 miles, showing that, well, you know, in fact, from milepost 10 to roughly 15, that you go down to almost 0. And so if we're going to apply a treatment between milepost 2 and 13, you know, but the old methods would give me that I'd get 0 benefit out there in some areas. And so, you know, that was really a sticking point for us. We knew it was making safety better, but we couldn't figure out how to do it. The Highway Safety Manual actually gets us there. So what does this look like when I take all my safety projects that I have over the next, over my STIP, and start applying this benefit to them? And, you know, this is on a log scale, you know, and so you start seeing this almost weird kind of looking slope on this, but it does show that, you know, at least a 20-to-1, you know, benefit that we have there really is the big area where we're gathering most of our benefits. And so, you know, looked at it a different way here is with the cumulative cost versus the the entire life cycle safety benefit of these infrastructure items that we're looking at there. And you can start seeing that you definitely start getting this knee of the curve out there that we generally are trying to look for when we start trying to figure out, well, how much money should we be applying out there for something like safety? Obviously, the hard part of this is still that you're dealing with lives out there. You know, and that was one of the things, you know, Gordon talked a little bit about, you know, applying weights and how do you apply weights when you use some of these things like critical crashes versus a dollars amount and trying to stack that up against the pavement. But you know, we're giving that a try, and we're coming around to, you know, that really I'm hedging my bets on being able to tell the districts, the people that make the decisions on what projects to build, is that, you know, your goal is a reduction. And as I show here, you know, the previous slides and so forth, you saw that I think we can achieve a 20-to-1 benefit to cost. With that 20-to-1 benefit to cost, you know, each district should be able to achieve a reduction of crash per year of 1.5 critical crashes, which is the injury-producing crashes plus fatalities. You know, it looks like it's an achievable target. And so really, you know, when I talked earlier about being able to not only do trade-offs at a high level, but actually being able to get down into some of these projects that, you know, and get down into some of the details and are you meeting your goals that you're expecting out there, is that I think that we're getting to that point where we actually have that. So these are the 9 goal areas that I track as far as planning and programming here. You can, you know, this is where WYDOT spends its money, and as you can see there, you know, with 10% going to bridge, 54% going to pavement, and 15% going to safety, you can see that that's the lion's share of the money that we're spending out there. And really, that's what I believe that the expert task group is trying to ask, and the same thing as Wyoming's trying to ask, is that 54% the right number? You know, should it be 60? Should it be 50? And how do you go about making that transparent to people and saying, well, you know, that this is a reason why that 54% was chosen as a number. But the other thing that this really drove out was when I first started trying to put together, you know, if these are the 9 major areas that WYDOT is spending money on, I needed a better way to go about, you know, how do I track these projects? And the example I use is that if I have a road, let's just say the pavement is in fair condition because it doesn't have very much cracking or it doesn't have a ride problem, but it does have a rutting problem. And I'm getting a higher than expected crash rate or a crash number on that section of road with inclement weather, whether it be icy roads or wet roads. Well, how do you go about capturing that when the district decides to do a overlay for both getting it up into good condition, but also getting it to a condition where you can, where it's no longer rutted? So what we do in this case is that, you know, so I did a snapshot out of our STIP, or the project list that builds our STIP. And so, but what I did is that each one of those 9 categories, and so, for example, you know, you see here, I got mobility, and then I put in that, you know, we did an analysis of the bid items, and it came out to be roughly 20%. And just so everybody knows, as I flat told them, I wasn't interested in putting too fine of a pencil to this, and so basically, I told them that you know, to the nearest 5% is what we're doing. But you can see there that we have the mobility, and then pavement is 45%, and then you had safety that was 35%. So when you looked at those things that went on in that project, it actually is broken out there, and you now have this project cost for each one of those based off of the estimate of that project. And as the project gets updated for the new estimates as it goes through the design, obviously those total projected costs continue to be changed automatically in our system there. But the critical thing to this is that there's quite a few of my jobs that, even though they may be minor, that we were doing things for safety, or we were doing things for mobility by putting in a passing lane or a turn lane or something, but it was just being captured under pavement, and it was causing me fits trying to figure out, well, how are my trade-offs actually happening? And then the other thing that I tried to do is under each one of my my big goals, like for example, this is bridge, and then what we had underneath that is that we got together with each one of those managers and said, okay, what are you interested in when you talk about that the bridge is going to get, 10% of the money? What do you want to report on? And for example, in this case here, he says, I want to report on how many bridges am I widening and repairing, and how many are heavy repairs, and so forth. So this gave me the ability, and I'll use the bottom one here as the example, is so I have a item that's called urban, and then under that urban, which is all the off-system things that we may be doing, I've got 15% going to bridge, 15% or 70% going to mobility, and 15% going to safety. So those owners, those program owners that own like the safety, for example, safety said that they have systemic safety treatments. They have let me check my notes here on the other systemic, the combined, or spot if they have a crash problem. That this gives them the ability to say, no, I'm fixing a crash problem there, or I'm fixing a systemic problem that's a problem throughout the state. And so I'm able to report back up to them on each one of those. So in conclusion there, as we've discussed, all three people I think discussed, is that each one of those program areas or goal areas have different benefit definitions, which makes it the trade-off more difficult. You need to decide on what method you want to do on the allocation, because as I say, just because you allocate money to a program does not necessarily mean that that program is going to that when they optimize within the program, that they're going to be able to do the same stack of projects that you were looking at when you originally did that allocation. What Wyoming found was a lot of our projects had multiple impacts on different goal areas, and so I needed a way to capture that in order to try to get this optimization, which is what we want to move to in the future. And as I said, one of the big game changers on that was the Highway Safety Manual being published, because it gives me the ability to do a predictive rather than just a hindsight thing. So that gives me the ability to get these curves and do some predictive analysis that if you do this project in two years with a certain amount of dollars, that we project that we're going to be able to see this amount of reduction. So with that, as everybody, I'll stand by for questions, and I appreciate your time. And I just want to stress to people that I think we're at the point that we're trying to get a dialogue started about some of the difficulties and some of the benefits it is to start doing a more formal trade-off analysis. So, so Katie, I'm turning it back to you then.
All right, thanks very much, Martin. Once again, I want to remind people, please enter your questions in the question box, and we will work our way through the questions that are being asked. Martin, one of the questions for you, one of the challenges with doing a trade-off analysis is having confidence in the trade-offs that are being evaluated. And I think that agencies have some confidence in their pavement analysis and their bridge analysis, maybe because of the tools that they have available. How confident, well, and you even talked about the fact with safety, you're getting some pretty good predictions from the Highway Safety Manual. But how confident are you, and how are you addressing this in some of those other 6 areas that you invest money in?
And and obviously that's a huge question for all of us. That we talked a little bit earlier about. The short answer is that, like what North Dakota was saying, is that some of these expert groups, because quite frankly, you look under my 9 goal areas there, and you start talking about community development, and right now we're getting a lot of pressure on spending quite a bit more money on bicycle travel. And well, how do you go about setting up those goals? How do you set up those projects? And we're trying to work on that. So right now, to answer Katie's question, is that right now the confidence in being able to stack up bicycle projects out there under community development is it is very weak. And so I'm trying to at least get that up to where we feel comfortable with that. But by the same token that I kind of lean back to, it is 3% of our money to go into community development and those or livability kind of issues, which is really kind of, I just didn't want to use the livability nomenclature on that. But it is one of those things, the diminishing returns, because it is a smaller amount of money that goes to that. I am trying to get better at that. I just wanted to use that as an example of a difficult thing when you start talking about livability and what weight do we want to put it. We're going to use an expert task group here in order to try to come up with those. But it is a diminishing return because does only represent 3% of my money. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Gordon, I would love to ask you a question of, do you think that there's a void between some of the available capabilities in DOTs and what decision makers are wanting? Gordon, are you there? I'm not hearing Gordon. Either Jack or Martin, what do you think? Is there a void between some of the available capabilities that you have available to you right now and what your decision makers or executives are looking for?
I guess I'm not certain. We're going to be providing our service indicators to our executives to take a look at it. The one thing, though, that we've reminded some of our colleagues and at the same time have kind of gently reminded our executives is that they've been making these decisions anyway. They've been making these decisions without any information. So even if what we have isn't 100% up to their preference, we're hopefully giving them more than what they had before when they make these decisions.
And I'll go ahead and I use the analogy of that this is almost like a football playoff, trying to decide how that works. Everybody hated the BCS before, and and the reason why it was kind of in the dark, it was all this computer generated, a combination of multiple things, and nobody could get it figured out. Now we've moved to a different system. I think that from my decision maker's standpoint is that they feel more comfortable being able to see good hard data saying, if you give me this money, I will return this benefit to you. But as far as trying to, is there a demand from them saying, should this be 3% or should this be 4%? We are not getting that, especially when you start talking about giving them a brief on weighting and coming up with this, if you had one more dollar to spend, what would the best project within WYDOT be? When you start looking at crew workloads, mobility of the people driving around the state, they feel more like that needs to be a human decision and not so much another tool that would actually tell them that you've got to build this job next. That being said, I know I've talked to a lot of states that know that's exactly what they're really hungry for. Their legislature wants to see those projects stacked up, one against the other. In Wyoming, we don't have that. So I personally, our executive staff, I don't think is really pushing that hard here.
Okay. Gordon, are you available to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I'm back here, Katie. I inadvertently muted myself there. Yeah, there is a disconnect, I think, but it varies. I mean, I think there are a few states who really would like to see some highly sophisticated tools that would be very data intensive, and I'm not sure that we have the data or the staff understanding to know how to do that. I think what Martin and Jack said is right on. The legislators do want to see a rational set of trade-offs, and they do appreciate that. And I think a lot of the states do have the ability to do these trade-offs based upon sort of the glass box as opposed to the black box. And we can lay out there what our volumes are and what our deterioration rates are and what kind of return we get from preservation and maintenance and demonstrate why we put our money in our buckets based upon those. I think it goes a long way. and making the trade-offs both between assets and even between districts. I mean, we found in Ohio that just showing the difference in districts and how their conditions varied and why we were investing more in one than another was appreciated by the legislature. It sends a message that you've thought it through and you do have some rationality to how you're investing their money.
Okay. In your presentation, you talked some about risk tolerance and that impacting the investment choices that you might make. I'm curious, Martin, have you been able to have that kind of a discussion with your executive team, you know, talking about the risk tolerance and how these benefits are relating to that risk tolerance for the agency?
We are in the infant stage on that. You know, the meeting that we did have up in Minneapolis with the with trying to determine risk, as I think I said at that meeting, is it opened my eyes a little bit on, well, how would we go about doing that? And so we've had several meetings right now with trying to define how that risk appetite is and how does Wyoming want to work with it. So we've had those discussions with the executives over there. We've got you know, other with a program that's going to spearhead this that I'm trying to work with. You know, so we are starting it, but really at that case there that, you know, I'd encourage everybody to have that discussion with the executive, your executive staff out there. But by the same token, in Wyoming, that we're just starting out on that, and I think we're starting to make some good headway, but we certainly don't have anything that we can actually put out there.
Okay. Jack, it sounded like from your presentation that you guys have sort of taken a risk perspective to this. So have you had those kinds of discussions?
Yeah, I think we have, but it's been more along the programmatic approach. I am, you know, this is just my personal opinion. There's some differing opinions within the department, but I'm a little bit more of a fan of the quantitative approach to a lot of these things. And, you know, for my example, I guess, you know, looking at what Gordon had in his presentation with, you know, the 10% of $100, you know, to me the biggest variable in that is where did you get that 10%? You know, how do you determine that number? Because it makes a big impact on your analysis. And, you know, on my end, I kind of think that, you know, we've been kind of pushing towards looking at other industries maybe to try to get a little bit more expertise brought in as to how to analyze risk. You know, there are other professions that work with it. So that's kind of the route that I've been advocating at the department here, is to try to pull in maybe like actuaries or things like that that can get us a little bit closer to a quantitative method of identifying risk rather than sort of that risk matrix that you see a lot of times.
All right. Thank you. We do have one question that was submitted in terms of some of the software tools in the market today. Is there one that you would recommend for developing optimized long-term plans for pavements and bridge preservation? And I don't know how comfortable you would be with making a recommendation, but can you at least talk about what programs you're using? Maybe Martin first and then Jack.
And so from the pavement standpoint, the Wyoming uses Agile Assets. From the bridge standpoint, you know, trying to get the numbers that we needed and the prediction, especially with the way that bridge inspections have been changing over time here, that we've actually, you know, I think the best way to put as far as optimization for the bridges is I think they're still actually putting that, you know, they're using Pondus as a base, but they're taking that data out and they're actually doing a lot of that stuff offline and homegrown software as far as trying to figure out what the best mix of treatments and which bridges to do that with. I think, you know, just using it's more of a homegrown thing. And as I say, that, you know, they wanted me to stress that, you know, that slide that I did give is, you know, is pretty much a good draft, but they do want to refine it. So, you know, they're constantly still trying to define what they're doing, and so we don't have a good answer on that.
Okay. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, I think I'm not really sure if I'm in the best position to offer a recommendation. I've heard good things about agile assets. You know, the DOT here, North Dakota DOT, we use DTIMs from Dayton for both our pavements and our functional capacity models. Similar to, I guess it sounds like similar to Wyoming with Pontus, it's part of it. I think there's a little bit of some expert engineering opinion tied to it too. From my understanding, Pontus has been updated recently. It was maybe a couple weeks ago. So our bridge manager is looking a little bit deeper into the changes that have been made in that software. But other than that, those are kind of the main asset management programs we use, and we're looking at potentially expanding that into the maintenance management side of things in the near future.
Okay. We're getting close to the end of our session today, so I want to close with asking each one of our three speakers one final question. I think Jack touched on the fact that this process that they've been developing has been a long time in the making, and I think Wyoming has been in the same situation. So I'm wondering if we could ask each one of our speakers to talk about what guidance or advice you might give to other practitioners who are trying to get started in this area. What are some of the first steps that they need to be taking? So I'll go in the order of the presentations. Gordon, what advice would you give to practitioners?
Well, I guess the first place would be just stacking up what your conditions are against your desired state and getting into even how it varies by district, by functional class, and starting from there. In making your trade-offs in terms of trying to bring up the districts or the functional classes or the asset classes that are substandard, and trying to show how you are allocating to those to bring those up to a higher condition level and making trade-offs. And I think what something Martin said I thought was very important, which is if you make the trade-offs but then don't track the money all the way down to the project that actually got delivered, you don't know that you truly made the right trade-offs. You may have programmed the right amount of money, but if you don't actually deliver the right next projects, then it's the process has been defeated. So I'd say it's a real good assessment of where your strengths and weaknesses are in your assets, allocating rationally between them, and then making sure that when you put money into an asset class, make sure it actually gets delivered in the type of project, just like Martin was talking about.
Great, good advice. All right, Jack?
I think for us, one of the best or the biggest helps was identifying, kind of the vision of and the goal as to, why are we doing this, as a department? Why is this important? What are we showing our customers? And to sell that message throughout all of your colleagues in your department, so that you can really get kind of a unified support and allow them to bring their ideas to the table. I think a lot of it has to do with communication, and that's the largest benefit that we saw is by having folks come with us rather than trying to kind of force an initiative through to everybody.
Good. All right. We're building some of that buy-in. All right. And Martin, what would your advice be?
My advice is always just you got to get started. You got to, you're going to, if you think that you're going to walk into the executive staff with a blank sheet of paper and say, what do you want? You're probably going to get a blank stare back. And so get something out there on paper, give it a shot, give it your best shot. There's a lot of smart people working around all of our organizations, and you can have some great discussions, just like what the expert task group is trying to develop, so that you can say, well, go back to your decision makers and say, okay, this is what I think will help you make the next decision. And they'll tweak it from there. But just like what I'm trying to do here is, well, the history was you start off with, okay, well, you're doing this much in pavement, this much in bridge, and they go, well, yeah, but I'm doing that because of, and then they throw in safety or community development or one of the other issues. And so, you got to start somewhere and put that out there and be willing to live through the iterations. But that Jack talked a little bit about how long some of these things take to try to get this developed and the feedback on. if you wait for the perfect system to come out, you're just going to be behind the 8 ball. So, you know, try to do something and then adjust from there.
Fantastic. I think great advice from all 3 of our speakers. I would like to thank Gordon, Jack, and Martin for being willing to present today and help answer some of those questions. To our audience, I would invite you to download the ETG white paper and please provide comments on that paper. And maybe we can start that discussion and advance the state of the practice. So thank you everyone for your participation, and we'll look forward to hearing or seeing you again on January 20th for our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you all for participating.